what was reported about Donald Trump. Donald Trump on fallen U.S. troops said all of them said very strongly, we cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, I'm sure that 19-year-old private had a personal conversation with Donald Trump, and or maybe as she was dying, bleeding out in Jordan, 8,000 miles from home, she scrawled in her blood, "Don't let Iran have a nuclear weapon." I mean, this is all so preposterous. It's also disgusting, and these people who are in charge are the worst of us. They are the worst among us, and this really is an idiocracy that we have. I've said it a couple times this week, so if people have seen me on other programs, I'll say it again. Why is this going on like this? Because you can't fix stupid. You can't change stupid. And so this war continues. All the other things about this administration continue. But this idea that these troops are sacrificing for something noble or for something that has any interests of the American people at stake or at its foundation is just simply untrue.
You know what's so outrageous? Because there was no assessment in the United States, even by Tulsi Gabbard. The latest report, it was that Iran has no intention of, there is no sign that Iran is pursuing nuclear weapons. And Donald Trump coming out and saying that these soldiers were somehow so much concerned about the Iranian nuclear program, so they wanted to sacrifice their lives to, to avoid that. And Matt, the way that the administration is hiding everything, because Pete Hegseth yesterday reported that the cost of the war was $37.5 billion. Which CBS News said, this is not going to be, they're not telling us what was happening or what was the cost so far. They're hiding everything. What is that, Matt, for you to understand? How do you understand it?
Well, they go in there, Nima, and they say the cost of the war is $37 billion, but we need $80 billion or whatever they're asking for, $70 billion for the Department of Defense and $8 billion for intelligence programs or whatever, plus about $12 billion for American farmers. So, they're saying it's only $37 billion, but then they're asking, for more than twice that. So what are they, right there is the lie. But the best person on all this is Stephen Semler, and Stephen's with the Center for International Policy. And I encourage people to follow him on Substack and on X as well. And Stephen's calculations are well over $100 billion already. And he lays it all out. He shows how he gets to that. And absolutely, with the amount of military infrastructure destroyed by the Iranians, by the amount of aircraft destroyed, including drones, by the expenditure of munitions.
Okay.
I don't know what the issue is. Obviously, again, the StreamYard gods are unhappy with me, but when you put all together and including just a base understanding of how much does it cost to keep 20 ships, which is roughly the size of the American naval force that's there, 50,000 troops, hundreds of aircraft. You just use a base calculation. Stephen comes up with more than $100 billion has been spent or has cost the United States since February 28. That's only the initial numbers. And I'm going to take my microphone off. Maybe it's my microphone. So we'll switch to, I apologize for the audio quality that's probably going to come, but let's try this.
Yeah. It seems that Matt has some sort of issue with his microphone because it's getting muted every time.
Yeah, now let's try this. Now let's see. I'm sure the quality is not as good. Switch to that. Okay. Yeah, apologies. But yeah, so, and we know that these initial costs are usually a fraction of what these wars actually cost long term, in terms of what it costs for veterans care, what it actually costs to replenish or refurbish, repair equipment that is lost, that is damaged, that is just exhausted. I mean, the amount of maintenance that will go into rehabbing, if you will, all those American fighter planes that are being used every day, it's incredible. Not just the amount of man hours, but the actual cost it will be for all those F-16 squadrons, F-15 squadrons, F-35 squadrons to get back into some kind of order after this is all done. I mean, so the cost for this is going to be running into the hundreds of billions of dollars. And of course, every day that this war continues, every week it continues, every month, those costs don't rise linearly. They tend to rise exponentially.
Matt, there is a new poll coming out from, the Politico has published a new poll considering the MAGA movement, those people who voted for Donald Trump. It says that the share of self-identified MAGA voters who believe the war is worth its economic cost fell from 50% in May to 37% in July. And while 37% now say the United States should continue its involvement only if costs do not rise further. Even those people who are agreeing with the war, they say if the prices are getting higher and higher, and we're not going to support that. This is the situation. I am sure Donald Trump knows what's going on with the MAGA movement, because there is a fracture happening within the MAGA movement. Even those people who believe in him, as this poll shows, they're not going to support him if the things getting worse. But what is that everything he's sacrificing everything? It's somehow difficult for those people who supported him, not for us, because we were talking about it before all this happening. But for those people who supported him, it's too difficult to understand what's going on with Donald Trump.
Yeah, I mean, and the key thing about that poll, Nima, is that that's his supporters. That's MAGA, right? That's not the entire U.S. If you ask the entire U.S., even less people support this war, right? Even less people think that it makes sense in any way, shape, or form. Most especially the costs of it, the economics of it, what's going to come out of their pockets, because the American people understand that this war is taking from their pockets. We saw the average gas prices in the U.S. get to over $4 a gallon again this week, which is a big psychological line here in the U.S. $3, of course, but then $4, and now many states it's at $5 a gallon, and diesel is much more expensive than that. Here in North Carolina, where I am, diesel's over $5.50 a gallon. In other states, it's $7, $8, even $9 a gallon out west, I believe. So, I mean, the costs here, everyone understands that. They see it when they fill their cars up, but they also, too, understand how this works and how the economy works, and how this is why prices are rising more than they're already rising, more than the American dollar has lost 30% of its purchasing power in the last 5 or 6 years. Every American knows that. Maybe they needed the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to put it together in an article for them, but everyone knows that. Everyone has felt that. So the insipidness of this war, I think just the reality of who these people are who are leading this war. They see the Pete Hegseths, they see the Marco Rubios, and their stomach, they don't have the stomach for it any longer. They don't have the stomach for the lies. They were told this war was going to last a few days, and it was going to be a few weeks. And that Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated and then re-obliterated, as well as all the ballistic missiles and and drones have all been destroyed. And the Iranian Navy is at the bottom of the ocean, but somehow the Strait of Hormuz remains closed. I mean, none of this comes out of DC makes any sense to anybody, and they're feeling it. And now I think we're going to, with American casualties starting to rise, that dominating the headlines here. The reality that Donald Trump only has about a little more than a third of his own base supporting this war. I think that's a testament to just how ridiculous this war actually is.
Do you It seems to me, Matt, that we're going to have this war next year and maybe go into July, something like that. It doesn't seem that this war going to fade away anytime soon. What is
No,
your estimate?
I think there's been this idea that this was Plan C, that Plan A was regime change, Plan B was to get a civil war or some type of failed state in Iran, and then Plan C was to do something modeled after the American campaign against Iraq from 1991 through 2003, one of containment with sanctions and blockades, basically trying to further isolate Iran from the rest of the world. But then, of course, the bombing. And most people forget that during the Clinton administration, the United States was bombing Iraq every third or fourth day on average. So the same type of idea, I think, was Plan C for Iran. Now, that is as ridiculous and as idiotic as the rest of this war, because Iran is not like Iraq. It's 4 times as large. It has roughly 3.5 times or so the population. But more importantly, geographically, where it sits, it's got this thing called the Caspian Sea that connects it to a world power, as well as the Iraqis did not have the military anywhere near the military that the Iranians did. The Iraqis, of course, didn't have the allies that the Iranians did. And so this use of the 1990s strategy against Iraq, and that, of course, a failed strategy as well, because it never removed Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party from power. It never engineered a successful coup. There were coup attempts, and those were all put down quite violently. And, so why do we think then that this somehow is going to work here in Iran? But they have no other plans. They have no other options. And the Americans were led into this by the Israelis. Certainly, there were American interests involved. There's been inertia in American imperial policy for decades to right what occurred in 1979. But certainly, we've seen the Israelis accomplish what they were looking for. They're looking for the Americans to wage war on their own against Iran as part of a supporting effort to Israel's priorities in Lebanon, in Palestine, in both the West Bank and Gaza, as well as along other parts of its periphery, like in Syria.
The war, when I compare the war right now with the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, those outcomes of those wars were within the borders of Iraq, within the borders of Afghanistan. Right now, that's not the case for Iran. It's all about the whole region is involved
Right.
militarily. The battlefield was in Bahrain right now, is in Kuwait. 70% at least. Kuwait is getting hit by Iranian missiles and drones. You see war going to Jordan. The whole region is involved in the war, while the whole economy, the global economy, is influenced by the case of the Strait of Hormuz and with the new move of Yemen in the Red Sea. This is something new, putting pressure on Saudi Arabia, which had the privilege of using the Red Sea when the war started. And right now, that privilege was removed by the new movement of Yemen, and which is more pressure on that. It's so complex, the issue of Iran. That shows the you know, huge capacity for drastic escalations, militarily and economically. And I don't know if that is totally perceived by Donald Trump, or he doesn't care about the outcomes of that, because the battlefield is Kuwait and Bahrain, or these countries. He doesn't care about these people and the global economy, he feels, but he gets the hit when it comes to the oil market.
This is a failing in the American foreign policy establishment at large, not just Donald Trump. This is the 20th century mindset that dominates American orthodoxy. This idea that it's a grand chessboard and that each of the pieces fit on its own individual square. And that type of thinking has real roots, a real foundation within the American foreign policy community.
whether it's members of Congress, military and intelligence officers, think tankers, journalists. You see this, say, in Syria and Libya, where those wars were not contained to Syria and Libya. Certainly, what's occurring now in Mali and Niger and Burkina Faso has connections, has real ties to what occurred in Libya in 2011. The Syrian war not being willing to be contained to the geographic boundaries of Syria, which upset and ruined all kinds of things for the Obama administration, particularly through the invasion and occupation of northern and western Iraq by the Islamic State. Again, just showed this belief within the American security establishment, foreign policy establishment, that these things are all manageable, these things are all containable, and as well too, just the dominance of this very linear 20th century, chessboard like thinking, where these, the globalization, which is a word I know a lot of people triggers a lot of people, but what globalization just wasn't limited to economics. Globalization occurred in military affairs. It occurred in information and technology, of course, right? I mean, so we shouldn't be surprised that this war was not able to be restricted or limited to the geographical boundaries that the United States wanted it to be. This was certainly something that the Israelis and the Americans were trying to do over the last several years by trying to fight the axis of resistance one at a time, to limit it that way, to contain the war. But once you went into this war with Iran, a war that Iran was always, because of its size, its strengths, because of its position, because of its preparation, was always going to be able to dictate terms. There was no way this war was going to be limited. And then, of course, as you referenced, it's just not the Middle East. The entire world has been drawn into this world because of the economics involved. And so this is a war in terms of the horizontal escalation. The Iranians were able to escalate this war just not regionally, but globally. And of course, now we can get back to the discussion of this shows why the Iranians are a world power. It's just not, they have the good fortune to be located geographically where they are, but they also have the smarts, the sense, the leadership to put together objectives and then strategies to achieve those objectives that demonstrate that, yes, these people are a world power, and that's how they're going to be reckoned with for years to come. And this gives more credence to what you just said, Nima, which I completely agree with, that this thing isn't ending anytime soon, that you and I, if have the good fortune to keep talking to you over the next several years, this is going to dominate our conversations.
Yeah. Matt, when it comes to the weapons that the United States is using, I'm talking about all the weapons, air defense systems, HIMARS. Yesterday, the HIMARS were attacked in Kuwait. One of them, the Patriot system, was attacked. One of them was hit by Iranian drone or missile. And the war is getting to, as we talk about it, the American forces were hit in Jordan. And it shows that somehow the situation is not that safe, even staying in Jordan. Where are we getting? What are the options for Donald Trump to put these, refueling tankers, fighter jets? What is that place? Is that going to be in Israel? Is that going to be in Greece? Is that going to be Diego Garcia? Or maybe Bulgaria? They're talking about, maybe they're going to go there. They're using. What is that?
Certainly, as the Americans get pushed further westward, and as the Iranians, smartly target the refueling aircraft, because those refueling aircraft are key to the American ability to carry out this campaign. It is a vulnerability, and there's only so many refueling aircraft. They're mostly all older aircraft, these KC-135s. There's some KC-46s, but that's been a corrupt boondoggle catastrophe, just like everything else the American military industrial complex produces. So you've got these old aircraft with limited air crews that are being used every day. And so exhaustion is going to set in both for the air crews and the airframes themselves, the airplanes themselves. So the further west you go, or the further away you go, that puts more stress, right? They have to fly longer to get someplace to link up with F-18s coming off of the carriers in the Arabian Sea, which is what they're doing. I mean, so they're traveling 1,000 miles or so just to link up with the fighter planes that are then carrying out these strikes. I mean, so very easy. You put pen to paper and you just see how you're now able to carry out less sorties, but then also too the stress it is putting on your air crews and on the airplanes themselves. And so as the Iranians push the Americans farther westward, good question where they go. They're not going to go to Turkey. Turkey's not going to let that happen. They're going to probably be massed in Israel with the fingers crossed hope that the Iranians don't escalate the war with the Israelis, which is something I think they don't want to do. But at some point, if that's where the key vulnerabilities for the Americans in terms of stopping or striking at the Americans who are attacking your country lay, at some point, the Iranians are going to have to hit those tankers that are in Israel. They could go right to Cyprus. They could go to Greece. They could go to Bulgaria. Whether or not the Iranians would follow through and follow them there with strikes, I think it's very likely. We saw that early in this war in the first week or so, where an American hangar on a British airbase in Cyprus was hit by the Iranians. The drone was launched, I believe, from Lebanon. I don't think it was a Hezbollah drone. I think it was an IRGC drone that was fired from Lebanon. So there's no reason that can't occur again. Particularly too, if that's what one of the critical vulnerabilities for the Americans are. If you want to stop these guys from attacking you, and that's the best way to do it, then of course the Iranians are going to follow that line of thought. So the reality that here we are, 4 months into this war, 5 months into this war, and the entire American posture, the entire American force and base structure in the Middle East, which has been built for decades, has collapsed, right, is really something. I mean, I don't know if we've seen a military collapse like this in terms of how it had set itself up to fight for decades and just run into reality, run into the modern era, and just been, realization that this isn't going to work. We have to evacuate all our troops from these bases. We can't keep these fighter planes forward. We can't keep these refueling aircraft forward. The brilliance of the Iranian strategy and putting the political pressures on these various countries so that it's, certainly the Americans could operate out of Saudi Arabia more, but they're not. And why is that? It's because the Saudis don't want them to. And then there's all kinds of now other pressures. Now you start talking about entangling alliances. You have this Saudi-Pakistani military alliance that's, it makes it complicated. Right? I mean, so the brilliance here of the Iranian strategy in terms of taking apart the American alliance, exposing and exploiting American vulnerabilities, we're really starting to see that come through. And then, of course, we have the one that everyone's been talking about for months upon months, years even. We were talking about this last year, the year before. We go back to 2015, talk about the American Air Force running out of bombs, when they were attacking the Islamic State in Syria and Iraq. The inability of the American defense industry to meet the demands or the needs of the American military. The fact that the Americans are running out of missile interceptors, that they're running out of standoff attack weapons. And so as the Iranians continue to deplete the American air defenses, as the American bases become even more vulnerable, as the Americans move farther west, all this starts to culminate on real pressure on the Americans. And now maybe you actually see an operational victory by the Americans, an operational victory by the Iranians over the Americans, where the Americans have to quit the war. So whereas you saw back in early April, the Americans, I think, recognizing this and calling for a ceasefire, and Donald Trump going along with that, now you have this situation where the Americans will run out of munitions if all our information is correct within the next month. So within the next week or two, what are the Americans going to start to do to prepare for that? And that's why I think you're seeing more and more calls to destroy all the power plants in Iran, right? To really put the pressure on the Iranian society. I think if we're going to try and assign any rationality to the Americans here, which is a huge leap here, but if we were, I think the Americans think that they have X amount of weeks left with their strategic petroleum reserve. That oil has not gone back up to 100. It's heading there. Last I checked today, it was at 94. But they have time. And that if the world could get through what it got through in March and April and into May before the MOU, then the world can survive another handful of weeks. So let's, and I think this gets into Donald Trump's art of the deal, putting pressure on his opponents. Let's hammer the Iranians more. Maybe we'll knock something loose. Maybe we'll kill the right person. Maybe we'll knock out power to Tehran, and then 15 million people, or how many people live there, will be forced to deal with 110-degree temperature, and then they'll get really hot and angry, and they're all with really, I think that's the sophistication of the argument that may be going around the White House right now as to why to carry out this, with the idea that we have up until end of August or mid-September before we're going to have to really consider what we're going to do about our own petroleum reserves. But again, there's so many things wrong about what I just said here, but that's the best I can come to, Nima, in a sense of why the heck they're doing this. But here we are again, trying to think rationally about these irrational actors.